Hey, everybody. It's that time of year again. It is Halloween time, which means Halloween movie madness here on Cinema Crusaders. This year, we have a bonus Halloween movie for you, but we're doing 5 horror movies this October and into the first week of November. And we're kicking it all off this week with The Exorcist. So real quick, I'll give you a rundown, and then I'm going to introduce my co-host. We're going to have The Exorcist this week. Then we're going to have a special guest, Mike Dunley from Omen Comics, who also works on Bloodworld with Raincross Press. Will be with us for the 2 weeks after that. He'll be helping us talk about Psycho and also Seven. And then after that, we're going back to some John Carpenter. We're going to be talking about In the Mouth of Madness. And then we're going to bookend all of this first week in November. We're going to wrap up all of this, our Halloween movie madness, with Exorcist 3, which stars George C. Scott, and among others. So great movie. And we'll bring the whole Exorcist full circle. But before we get to all that, and before we get to this week's movie, which is The Exorcist from 1973, I need to introduce my co-host. First, I'm going to introduce, he's a writer, not only for Raincross Plus and Bloodworld, but also for Omen Comics and also the Blitzverse or Revelation Comics. I'm talking about none other than Steve Shadewing Sellers. How you doing, Steve?
The power of cinema compels you. This was one of those movies that I came to late. I tried watching it a couple of times and never quite finished it until recently. A lot of it is just that, I came into horror fairly late in life. It was kind of like one of those midlife things that, I finally realized, maybe I should start watching, some of these. And this was one of those. And I will say this movie has the pacing of a book, and it feels that way. And it is an adaptation. But when it gets to where it needs to go, it is truly impressive. So I can't wait to talk about it.
Here is the truly illuminating part for all our viewers out there. While Steve came to this late, and he's a much better person than I am, because I came to this movie early. I watched this movie in 1979 when I was all of 8 years old. So, and this was one of the movies that kicked off horror for me. So, that's where I loved horror from an early age, and this is one of the ones that kicked it off. Although the first horror movie I ever watched, for everybody out there, this little trivia question for you. It's kind of a horror / psychological thriller, was Wait Until Dark, starring Audrey Hepburn. So, and maybe we'll do that movie eventually. But first, I need to introduce the second Crusader. Lance will not be joining us today. Unfortunately, he has a sad commitment that he has to make. So, condolences to you, Lance, and I hope everything is okay. But I do want to introduce my other co-host. He's last but not least. He is the man with all the facts. He is a writer and an artist. He is the art director. He is the second in command on Bloodworld, as it were. I'm talking about none other than Jeff Bracey. How you doing, Jeff?
Your mother darn socks in hell.
Well, thank you. Okay.
It's like your feet will be nice and warm in like the hellfires of the afterlife. So there's that, doubly warm. Maybe that's why it is hell. Everybody gets a fur coat. 1,000 degrees, you get a fur coat. There you go.
Hey, you know what I just realized? Now Steve understands my joke all the time where I talk about needing to bring a young priest and an old priest. So
yes.
Well, really, aside from it being like a classic opening to a joke about a bar.
Yeah.
Really going to miss Lance on this one. I wish we'd he always brings a wonderful cinematic expertise to these. And this is a classic film. Like, it is fundamentally the horror film of a generation. So really looking forward to get into it. And I wish we could have had his perspective. So we'll have to soldier on as best we can.
And this is also, I do have to say, this is one of those movies that really kicked off a new genre that in the 70s, there were other movies about demonic possessions and stuff prior to this. And somebody correct me, was Rosemary's Baby a 60s or 70s movie? I don't know.
I want to say 70s.
Yeah, I want to say 70s. I'm not sure what time in the 70s, but that was less demonic possession and more demonic insemination, if you will.
Yeah, but I think that this movie really kicked off that whole era. I mean, and then we had, you had Omen, You had Rosemary's Baby, I believe, in the 70s. After this, you had Amityville Horror. I mean, you had all of this, and really until John Carpenter came out with Halloween, and then you had Friday the 13th, and then it went into a whole nother setting. This was kind of what dominated horror for a while.
It was 1968, by the way.
Okay.
So because like Halloween, I believe, was 79, maybe 78. So like it was kind of paralleling at the time, but like this film just lit everybody up, and that's all they could talk about for a while. And of course, if something catches the attention in Hollywood, you can expect a glut of imitators to come along right after.
Yeah, and I will say that for all of you, just a quick recommendation: if you liked slasher movies, and then you liked these demonic possession movies, there is a very little known film that I would love to cover here sometime before we get to Halloween again next year, starring Lou Diamond Phillips, which was really
The First Power.
Yeah, The First Power. Great movie. Check it out.
Really underrated
good
film.
Yeah, and it's starring Lou Diamond Phillips as the lead, and he is amazing in it. Really, really good. So hopefully, maybe we'll talk about that sometime. I'd love to talk about it.
I'd love to, man. That's a fun film.
So real quick, for all of you that don't know the basic plot, we're going to get into the basic plot real quick, and then we're going to jump right into the analysis of this film, because there's a lot of things we gotta hit on with this movie. I will say, for all of you out there, we watched the director's cut of this movie. Absolutely, yeah. It really did feel like something that was plausible with some added elements to it, versus like The Exorcist 3. So
I was going to say, like, the most scary part is the most real part of this movie, and that is the invasive surgery of Regan McNeil.
Yeah. Plus that they took the, and we're going to get to that, but I think one of the scary parts about that is that you see that they took the time to do all of that psychological testing and everything on her, and that felt real. It's like, okay, what would it be like to be someone who's possessed, who is going through all this testing, and they can't find anything wrong with you, and they're just more and more and more they're doing. And it kind of, there's another movie, I don't think it was a huge movie, but the Exorcist of Emily Rose, which was also based off of a true story from Germany, that is kind of similar in that respect. And unfortunately, the girl in that story for real actually died. So, and led to a trial and everything.
That was a very big case at the time.
Yeah. So quick rundown on the story real quick, and then we're going to jump right into this.
Getting my spooky lighting.
We start with the priest, Father Veneman, and he is in Iraq, and he's doing some research. He's an archaeologist. Marin. Why did I say Veneman?
I don't know.
I don't know. That might be from Exorcist 3.
It's Lancaster Marin.
Yeah, Father Marin. And Father Marin in this movie is played by Max von Sydow. He's very, very good in this movie. And he's doing some research in Iraq, and he comes across an image, Pazuzu. And it's almost like he gets a premonition that something is coming, that evil is building up. And I don't think that we ever get a thorough explanation as to how the child, Regan McNeil, played by Linda Blair, gets possessed. Although I think it's
the Ouija board.
Yeah, I think it's hinted at that the Ouija board has quite a lot to do with it.
But you also get a feeling that there's an aspect of destiny to it.
Yeah.
Because
rule number 1: do not ever use a Ouija board in a horror movie. Never, never, ever.
Because Father Marin and this demon know each other.
Yeah, and we'll ignore the fact that in Exorcist 2 they tried to explain that it was because she had psychic powers. Exorcist 2, we just forget about Exorcist 2. We put that off to the side.
First rule of Exorcist 2 is we don't talk about Exorcist 2.
Exactly. So we get introduced to Father Marin, and we go through we follow a little bit about him, and it's kind of interesting, and I want to hear your guys' take on this in a second, because the movie does meander a little bit at the beginning. You're not sure what exactly is going on. First, we meet Father Marin, and then we go and we straight to Georgetown and in DC, and we see the mom. What is her name again? Chris McNeil, played by Ellen Burstyn, who's filming right there at Georgetown University, and we see glimpses of Father Dyer and also Father Karras, and we're just kind of following these people in their daily lives, and we see them interacting or whatever. And then the first hint that we have that something is going on is that the mom, she wakes up and she hears what she thinks is rats in the attic. And so they're moving around, and the caretaker says there's no rats, and they go to trap rats, and they don't find them. And the thing I find interesting is that little by little, the oppression part of demonic possession begins. So William Peter Blatty really did his research here. He talked to a lot of exorcists. This movie is based on a true story. And one of the things about demonic possession that the Catholic Church teaches is that it starts with oppression. And it starts very small. It's small things, sounds, smells. And then her bed starts to shake, and her mom doesn't believe her. And then she starts to change a little bit. She starts to curse and things like that. And so this builds up to the whole movie. And her mom thinks that she has a psychological problem. They go through psychological testing. And then they give her the psychoactive drugs or drugs for psychological problems.
Give her Ritalin.
Yeah, Ritalin, and I think they put her on some other They put her on Thorazine at one point.
When it gets really bad.
And this is something that I'm kind of referencing other movies here, but in The Exorcism of Emily Rose, one of the things that they talked about in that actual case is that it was their belief that these drugs weakened the spirit of this person and led to demonic possession. Whether you believe that or not, we'll leave that up to you, in the metaphysical. But you see that portrayed here in this movie as well, is that she gets worse the more that they're doing these types of treatments and everything, plus just the continuing influence of the demon. And eventually it gets to the point where the medical professionals say, yeah, we're stumped. We punt. Why don't you go find a priest? So that's basically what happens. And what I think is really interesting here is that one of the little known facts about this is that Father Dyer is played by an actual priest. He was a priest.
Did not know that.
Yes. And unfortunately, this man has a checkered past. He got caught up in the sex abuse scandal later on in life. But he was an actual priest. So they brought an actual priest in to play Father Dyer. And also the priest who is the superior of both Father Dyer and Father Karras, the one that approves the exorcism, was an actual Catholic Jesuit priest as well. So both of those parts were played by Jesuits in this movie, which I'm not sure why they did that, but it was interesting. And there's a lot of, I guess, Catholicism.
Sometimes movies do that. Like for the movie The Warriors, they had hundreds of actual gang members to fill out those scenes.
Yeah. And what I think is interesting,
authenticity, they got it.
As the movie progresses, and they go to the Catholic Church on this, most of the members of the Catholic Church are outright skeptical or of the whole demonic possession angle, or think it's outdated. They don't want to engage with it, and this was very much, true to life of what was going on in the Catholic Church at the time, and to a certain extent now as well. And they portrayed that very well, as far as, the church won't go through with the exorcism unless they exhaust all the other possibilities. And so this continues, and Father Karras is doing investigations. He's a psychologist, and eventually we come around to the ending. The climax of the film is the actual exorcism, where Father Karras is assisting Father Marin in the exorcism, and they go through and they do quite a bit of the exorcist, the Roman ritual from the Catholic Church, or what they could show. And I think it's really spiced up a little bit for Hollywood, but it's still a pretty good representation, especially where Father Marin talks about, don't listen to the demon, or there's only one, when it says this legion and that lies. And there's a lot of very good stuff mixed in there with, Hollywood. So I think it's well written in that regard. And spoiler, Father Marin ends up dying because he has a heart condition. Yet another thing that is pretty true to reality in that one of the things they do with Exorcist is they always want them to be in good physical condition, and they're very careful with the physical, checking on the subject, because there have been a number of priests and people who have undergone exorcism who have died from the process for a variety of reasons. Depending on what your belief system is, it could just be stress, or the constant. They do this nonstop until they eventually exorcise the demon, and it could go for weeks. So you could have exhaustion and things like that. So Father Karras then invites the demon into himself and ends up killing himself by jumping out the window, taking the demon with him, and that's the end of the movie. And really, the interesting thing is there's only two people that die in this movie, as far as I can remember. It's Father Karras, and then the director of the film that the mother was starring in, Burke Dennings. What is also interesting about this movie, and then I'm going to shut up and let you guys talk, is that
I don't believe it.
Burke Dennings, the actor who played Burke Dennings, also kicked off that whole thing that happened in the 70s and early 80s where people thought movies were cursed. He was one of the first ones to die shortly after filming a horror movie. So the actor who played Burke Dennings died, and he died of complications from the flu.
As long as he didn't die with his head turned all the way around after falling from a 3-story window.
No, he did not. But it is interesting, and I remember that talk, and then the most famous instance of that was the little girl who died
Poltergeist.
From Poltergeist, not from Poltergeist, but after filming Poltergeist. So so it was interesting that there was this whole hysteria, and it really had to do with the fact that these movies gripped the public's imagination, and they became larger than cinema. I mean, they became forces unto themselves, where people were changing their lives based on movies like this or the Amityville Horror. I have a great story that I tell sometimes about my neighbor who went absolutely batshit crazy because they saw the Amityville Horror. So, things like that happen. So this movie really grabbed the consciousness, and this was one of the first ones to do that. So with that said, I'm going to go to Steve first. What were your genuine impressions of the movie, the plot, how it ran? What did you think of the movie?
Generally, I really, really liked it. It takes a little bit of time for it to get where it goes, and I understand why. It's because it's based on a book, and it keeps the book's pace. So yeah, we have to see the mom go through her emotions. We have to see Father Karras deal with the mother, and then his mother, and then she ends up dying, and that establishes his motivation for what happens later, and it also establishes his weakness and his moral crisis towards the end of the movie. So you understand why that's necessary. It's just a bit dragged out. I think what really is dragged out though is all the time kind of spent like trying to figure out what's wrong with Regan. I get that they have to show like they're exhausting like every single possibility, but it's like, did we really need to see Regan dissected in the surgical room? No, we really didn't. But again, all of this is we watched the director's cut, and the original cut was probably shorter. So who knows how much of that
not by terribly much.
Yeah, honestly, okay. A lot of what they added in the director's cut was stuff that they cut out for censorship, and they added a lot of things like at the beginning, the stuff with Pazuzu. That was a much longer segment. And then they added some additional like footage that was cut out. That was a little, it might have been a little bit too much on the nose on the theaters. Like when you would see the images of the demon in various places through the house, there were like flashes. A lot of that was cut out in the original cut and was put back in. Although I have to say that the scene with the crucifix with her,
I remember seeing that back in the 70s.
Yeah, that was in there, and that was. We're going to get to that because I want to talk about what that.
Yeah, that was kind of creepy.
That was hardcore right there.
Yeah, at first I was sort of like, okay, why is everybody, going off on this movie until I saw that scene? Like, yeah, I could see why that scene would bother some people. But a lot of what's in there, actually, by modern standards, is not really that bad. So that was kind of like one of those things. I really did like the whole scenes with Father Merrin early on, because I just think that the idea of this priest who is also a relic hunter, going off, looking for, evidence of demons, from these old cultures, and, looking at these profane artifacts, for whatever demonological reasons he's doing. You could get an entire movie out of that. It would be really, really cool. So I will say I would love to see like a prequel dealing with like young Father Merrin going off on some of his holy pilgrimages.
They did try to do that with which Skarsgård is. It's the father of Alexandra. Stellan Skarsgård, I believe. And
I believe so,
yeah, so they made Exorcist Dominion, and then they shelved
Legion.
it, and then there was two, because they actually reshot the entire film with the same cast, and they went to an entirely different direction. I will say that one film is better than the other, but for my money, neither of them is great.
Yeah.
Which is too bad, because Skarsgård's amazing.
Yeah, I'll also say, like, one of the things I really like is that the main priests in this movie are not stereotypical priests. They actually have detailed lives outside of being priests. You get to find out that Karras was a boxer, things like this, and the fact that he's a psychologist in addition to being a priest. All of these things, and then the moral conflict that he has, because he has the guilt issue involving his mother, which I love how they foreshadowed the whole business with the possession by saying, yeah, one of the catalysts for possession is guilt, because dealing with the idea of oppression, as you were talking about, and actually when I talked about The Conjuring not that long ago with Mike Nunnally, and when we talked about that, a lot of it is about the demon gaining fear. So you have a situation where this priest is vulnerable to this demon because he has this doubt. He has this guilt that he feels over, what happened to his mother. And as Merrin said, this is a psychological battle with the demon. And the demon totally takes advantage of this. So the character arc that he takes towards the end, I think is very, very believable. But Karras comes out of it, doing the right thing, even though he knows he's vulnerable to it. And he's taking advantage of that. I thought that was really, really a clever twist, because I thought initially the story was going to be about Karras regaining his faith, because he talks about losing his faith. No, he takes advantage of his lost faith, as a weapon against the monster. And I'm just like, yeah, that is really a cool way to end it. And yeah, so I like a lot of what's going on in this movie, even if there are just some elements that, I think are not like absolutely perfect. I think it's pretty close.
Well, I will say also that I've had the opportunity to be around a lot of priests in their free time. I used to go to DC and be able to stay down at one of the boarding houses down there when I was in college and stuff like that, because I had a friend that was there, and I had a friend who was a priest. And it really is true to what, priests are like behind the scenes. It's like they do swear occasionally. They try not to, but sometimes, different priests have different, ways of interacting with things. They do have a sense of humor. Some of them drink, some of them do not. Everybody smokes in this movie because it's the 70s. So it was like it was very true to form that way, and I appreciated that as well. So. Jeff, what did you think of the movie and how it's presented and how it flows?
I gotta agree with Steve. There's several minutes of unnecessary footage in here, things that it could have been tightened up. I do like all the character stuff. I think they had good reasons for taking the time with that and building into that. A lot of that makes sense, and I appreciate a good slow burn. So, I thought all of that was very relevant. And I did like the extended sequences of Father Merrin in the Middle East, which was very interesting. Here's this Jesuit priest who is out in Iraq, surrounded by Muslims. And, he and the Muslims all love each other. They have really good relationships, and he's out there helping them dig up their past and categorize things. And we never really get a true definition of why he's doing this. We can assume that he does do some research into demonology, because we know that many years ago he actually had performed an exorcism that lasted months and it nearly killed him. So perhaps he was just always on his guard from that point on, or wanting to be forewarned is forearmed. But Max von Sydow, of course, is an amazing actor, and he always has a presence in a film, and that carries through here. Even though we get this extra vulnerability that this character has certain medical issues due to his age, and perhaps left over from the exorcism that he performed in Africa as a younger man. So I really like all the character stuff. I like the build-up. There was a lot of stuff that really could have been trimmed down. And due to some issues here at home, I didn't get to watch this film a little bit earlier in the day as I wanted to. So in order to make time to see the whole film, I was fast forwarding through some stuff because I knew it was like, I don't need to see this. We can just move on, like get to the next thing. And I didn't lose anything by doing that. No, not even watching the director's cut. I certainly appreciate some of the stuff that went into the director's cut that I couldn't see in the theatrical release. And I'll tell you, as a kid, when I saw this film, I must have seen it on HBO. So I was like really freaking young when I saw it, and it jacked me up, man. This film was messed up, especially if you're growing up Christian. And that scene with the cross, buddy, that was just like, the top of my head flew off, spun around, like landed back down on my skull. That was way out there. And nobody ever seen anything like that. Nobody dared ever do anything like that. And this is coming off the era of grindhouse movies, where grindhouse movies got really nasty, but this got nasty in a believable sort of way. It wasn't over the top. It was played straight, and I think that's part of what made it scary. As you guys rightly said, it feels believable. There's a great line from George Burns in Oh God. He's talking to John Denver. He says, like, everybody sees this movie.
That movie.
Oh, yeah. Terrific film. He says, but everybody sees this film, with this little girl, and all of a sudden everybody believes in the devil. It's like, yeah, you watch this movie, you can certainly believe in the devil. And I think a lot of people did believe in the devil after watching this film. And you can certainly see why they did. You can see the power of media and the power of a well-crafted piece of cinema. The film is staged beautifully. Some really, really clever shot placement in the way they arrange things, the use of silhouette to set things up with the lighting, as well as the cinematography. And of course, the sound design of the film. I think this was the first film I ever really noticed sound design because of all the horrific sound effects that I never saw that in a horror movie before. I don't think that before this, but the sound effects really get you when you see all the stuff that goes on with Reagan. It just really messes you up when you see it. Maybe not by today's standards, but back then, guys, this was like the most shocking thing going on out there. It was truly, truly frightening.
I agree with you. I think, from a psychological perspective, I think this movie still definitely has the capacity to scare me. From a shock perspective, there are a couple scenes that are still shocking, specifically that crucifix scene. I'll never get over the shock of that. Every time I see it, it's just as disturbing as the last time I saw it. But as far as the other stuff, the things that were disturbing to me as a kid now are I'm going to say almost tame. Like the bed moving and things like that, because
it's actually kind of sad when you think about it, how we don't really bat an eye to a lot of this, but like when the director William Friedkin was talking to the writer of the book and the script, William Peter Blatty, he came back to him when they were getting to the exorcism scene, some of the stuff Regan would say to her family and everybody trying to help her. He's like, yeah, we need to punch this up. And he's like, it's already pretty awful, man. It's like, no, we really need to punch this dialogue up. It's like, well, what do you want? He said, I want the worst. Yeah. And that's what you get. I like this. As shocking as the visuals are the language this 13-year-old Linda Blair is using in this film. And, like you would get away with certain things back then in the 70s that you wouldn't let a child do in a film these days in most cases. So again, that's another thing that just blew the top of everybody's head off. Like it was just so extreme. It was so viscerally in your face.
I'm going to come right back.
It shows how evil this creature is. I mean, they're corrupting an innocent child. And the fact that that even though it's the demon saying the words, the fact that the child is saying it, I mean, really kind of shows absolutely how malevolent this thing
Yeah,
is.
I mean, that's precisely the point. Like, this is how ugly and nasty true evil is.
I'm going to come right back to you in a second on that, Jeff. I was going to go to production first, but what you just said makes me want to go to the cast. And feel free to talk about other cast members as well. But I want to hear from both you guys on Linda Blair's performance in this, one, but two, do you think they went over the top with having a child do these things? She's simulating doing things with the crucifix. She's telling an adult, supposedly her mother, when she's acting, to perform sexual acts on her. She's saying horrible things. I mean, just absolutely terrible things. And Linda Blair has talked later in life about how this did affect her. I mean, it did have an effect on her later in life. And, to her credit, she then, went into, she did a Leslie Nielsen parody of The Exorcist.
The Repossessed.
Yeah. And she kind of got over it with, doing different things, but she never really outgrew The Exorcist. She was always typecast as that woman, that girl. And it affected her career. I think it affected her personality. And I think of that all the time. I think back to Linda Blair, and then I think back to other child actors who may not do things as extreme as this, but what does it do to a child when you have a 7-year-old child saying, cursing up a storm or doing stuff or whatever? I mean, does it go too far? So I'm going to go with Jeff, and then talk about that and any other cast you want to talk about, and then we'll hit Steve up and then come back around to me. So.
Yeah, now Linda Blair was 13 at the time. In the movie, she's supposed to be a 12-year-old girl, so like very close in age to where she's at there. And again, they knew what they were doing. And like when we tend to think of innocence, there's few things that get us more than that prepubescent virginal purity, of a child. She's not a woman yet. There's no indication that she menstruates or anything like that in the film. So you've got all of that. So she's about as pure as it can get. Part of the buildup of this movie is showing what a lovely, kind-hearted, sweet, playful, creative child that she is. Oh, look at that little Halloween kitty there. And so we've gotten all this time to get to know her. So by the time we see the possession start to come on, it becomes as shocking for us as it does for the family. And this is where I think things get rough for Linda. Her performance is amazing, obviously Oscar worthy. I mean, just the fact that a girl her age could pull all of this out in conjunction with the guiding hand of a skilled director. But I think part of the thing that got her was maybe not so much the performance. I don't know what her religious background is, if that played into it at all. But she got talked about a lot after the film. And, when you're that young and you're that impressionable and like this is your big breakout film, so everybody sees it. And she said people would like say, well, you can't possibly act that well, not at your age. Like there's got to be something wrong with you.
Right.
And so that got into her head. They're like, well, shoot, maybe I am kind of screwed up. And it does have a trajectory on her career, because the very next thing I remember her doing is she's only 13 or 14 at the time. And I don't remember the name of the film, but she does a film where she gets like a gang molested by a bunch of girls in a school shower. So she went from one extreme to another, and that had to be playing pretty hard on her mind at the time. Like, I don't know why anybody would have signed her up for that, why she would sign up for that after just having already gone through this very extreme film. And it wasn't as harrowing as doing the entire Exorcist movie, because it's just the one scene. But at the same time, really traumatic thing to portray. And acting is one thing, but child actors are still child actors. And as good as you are, they kind of have things in place now to try and protect children psychologically when they're doing films. I remember when they were doing the new It series. I forget the name of the youngest Skarsgård who played Pennywise, but he's scaring the living crap out of one of the kids, and the kids were legitimately scared of him. And he leaned in, he's like, cut. He's like, "Are you okay? You're okay?" He's like, "Love what you're doing, man. That was great." And they're like, "You scared me. That was awesome." So like he took it like a champ, but you kind of have to take some of that into consideration, because back in the older days of Hollywood, they would do some pretty extreme things. And in some films, this even included actually killing animals, something that would not fly at all today. But there are horses that got killed, dogs that got shot, animals that got blown up because we don't want to spend the money on making a dummy. It's not going to look right. And who cares? We bought the horse. We can do what we want with it. So things like that used to happen. Things used to be more extreme, and I can see why it had an effect on her. And it did take her a long time to kind of get around it and own it. But I think a lot of that ended up being not just the role. I think she could have handled that. She seems to be a very strong individual. But I think the public response is the thing that really got her as a young person.
I don't think her representation did her any favors either,
No.
because before the age of 18, not only did she do this movie, she did Exorcist 2. She was also, like you mentioned, the one movie you were talking about, but she did several other movies. She did a movie where she was the child lover of a man who took her away to a cabin.
Oh, geez. So it's practically Lolita. All right, great.
Yeah.
Just one extreme thing after another. Like, yeah, you're the girl. She's the girl you can do anything to.
Yeah.
Horrifying.
So, and it really, really begs the question, which is why I kind of brought it up, and I remember for the longest time, I felt kind of bad for her, when I got to the point when I was in the 80s where I was old enough to read like entertainment news and stuff, because they were always, anytime she would do anything, they referred to her as that girl from The Exorcist, and people would speculate on, what it did or what her mental state was. And it was like, God, it was just must be terrible. So
nobody could buy that I was an actor doing an acting job. And you're like, you got to be messed up. Nobody's that good an actor.
Yeah. Steve, what did you think of the cast, but specifically Linda Blair? And I think we're going to go around again because she really, rightfully so, I think she dominates the movie. But I think there are other performances here that we need to talk about. So let's just start off with Linda Blair. What did you think of her performance, but also the idea of having a 13-year-old girl do the stuff that a 13-year-old girl does in that movie? So
this movie breaks my heart in so many ways because the performance is brilliant. There's absolutely no question that Linda Blair acted her heart out in this movie, and she made the role work, not just as Regan, but as the Pazuzu. She is legitimately scary. Even without the makeup, the performance is just that good, where she sells the idea that there's this malevolent force behind those eyes. The way that she stares at Damien, it's just really, really primal. And yet, I wonder whether the cost of that was too high. I mean, you get one of the greatest performances by a child actor ever, but at the cost of her future, at the cost of her psychological well-being. She's been typecast into this role, which is made it even worse because she keeps being brought in to do all these terrible roles where she is basically a victim. What does that do after a while? I don't know, but it's just one of those things. I just find it very sad. I do feel bad for her. I do. I really do. And because I feel like she should have done better in her life.
I think that it really, if you really want to get overly deep into it, or maybe it's not overly deep, I'd almost say that she is a victim of this movie. It cost her innocence. Yeah. And what does it do to have a child be having to live through those types of things? So I felt bad for her, and I felt bad for her as a teenager. Quite, I could really empathize with her because I was always seeing this stuff. And I have to give her credit. Another movie, like I mentioned it earlier, she made fun of the whole thing and made fun of herself. And Leslie Nielsen was great at this in Repossessed. Yeah. They really took it.
Well, yeah.
Said, so.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me a little bit of that one scene in I want to say it was the third Harry Potter, where the idea of confronting your fear by laughing at it. I just feel like that's probably what she was doing. She was confronting her greatest trauma, by making a joke of it, and in that way found peace with it. I just wish it hadn't taken that many years for her to find that. But I'm going to go ahead and move on to other questions because I don't know enough about the history of Linda Blair to really get too much into it anyway. And
Sure.
honestly, I feel like a lot of these other performances deserve some credit.
Well,
Max von Sydow we talked about. He's always great in everything. And what really I think is amazing is that this guy has so much screen presence and charisma that even though he is not in the majority of the film, when he shows up, he commands attention immediately and he holds it. And these actors that are in these roles are very good. And he holds his own against Linda Blair, who, up to that point had dominated the movie. That's impressive. That shows what kind of top quality actor that man is. And honestly, it's like I'm used to von Sydow being older and a lot because I see a lot of his later roles more than these earlier ones. And so it was just like watching him as Marin. If you don't know that's Max von Sydow, you might like do a double take and it's like, have I seen that guy before? He was just very, very, very convincing. A lot of these other actors, I really didn't know that well. Ellen Burstyn, I thought did very well, and I want to talk about like a couple of things that I found out from looking at the extras on the Amazon version of it, which they pointed out like she was modeled after Shirley MacLaine because MacLaine was a friend of William Peter Blatty's, and I think that takes total sense. If you look at Burstyn's performance, she looks like Shirley MacLaine.
Yep.
She wears the little hoodie like Shirley MacLaine. I mean, she has the general look
and the haircut
and the feel and the mannerisms. They have the haircut and everything. So
that makes a lot
and
of
also,
sense.
and MacLaine is very spiritual. She is she is somebody who believes in this stuff, and so I felt like that made total sense for her to be that person, and she's in Hollywood. So I mean, that the way that Burstyn pulled it off, she was a very convincing Shirley MacLaine, and I was just like, yeah, that absolutely works. She did exactly what she needed to do. She when she's hysterical over her daughter, those moments feel real and true. All these sorts of moments, where she's just having to be strong for her, or despairing and having doubts and all these things that she has, that whole emotional range. I felt like Burstyn got it. So, this is another actress who's a veteran and who knows her stuff, and it came across really well.
I thought her performance and her frustration with the medical professionals was one of her best parts to me.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because I mean, you can understand this. It's like, yeah, these people are all locked in a mental box, and they're not, until the very, very end, they're not willing to consider, other options. And so, at that point, it's like, yeah, well, let's go talk to the priest because I got nothing else.
I mean, like,
and when she kind of hits that point, it's just really, really well done on her part.
One of my favorite parts of her is just a very small thing when the detective comes by her house to talk, and she's trying to be calm and cool because she's got concerns. Maybe she'll reveal to Father Karras later that she thinks her daughter killed Burke, but she's trying to hold all this together, and she's trying to be a good host and all this and keep this sort of facade going. And when she shuts the door behind him and locks the door, she has this quiet little breakdown that I thought was just brilliant.
Isn't it? It was really, really
and
good.
I will say, Lee Cobb also is just really, really good in this role. And I will say, like, I until you read the book, you're not going to be able to tell this. But I was telling Nem early on before the show that he reminds me of Nem's character Michael Domenicali. And it's just like, and it's just nothing specific. It's just like the general vibe of the character and the way that he acts. And I just kind of felt like yeah, this guy comes across as a believable, salty earth type of cop. And I kind of got that Domenicali feel from that, I think.
I will say that I was very, I was kind of tickled that you picked up on that. And not only that, but the fact that, he's obviously a different character, but I also played with this relationship between a detective and a priest, except in the book, the detective and the priest are brothers. But but this whole relationship, and it kind of played off of The Exorcist 3 as well, and I think George C. Scott plays Kinnaman in Exorcist 3, the detective, and life has taken its toll on him, and so I'll be interested to hear what you have to say once you see Exorcist 3, and we talk about that as well. But
Cool.
I really appreciated that comment. It was really cool. Thank you. So
Yeah, no problem.
Jeff, what did you think of other cast members, other cast performances?
Well, what can you say about Max von Sydow that 100,000 other people haven't said about Max von Sydow at some time or another? So let's get into Jason Miller, the father, Damien Karras, who very interestingly, Damien was an okay name until the Omen films came out.
Yeah.
And so here's the name that we
I love the
devil.
irony of that, though.
I know it's wonderful because here's this name that we associate with the devil, but at the time it was just a fine name, it was an old world name, and it would later become synonymous with the devil, which becomes very ironic by the end of this film and by the time The Exorcist 3 rolls around, because we've had a few Omen films by that point. So Jason Miller, he represents the new Catholic faith, which is a secular faith, as Nim rightly put. There was a time of a sort of a transformative Second Reformation, if you will.
Vatican II.
Yeah, people were starting to get away from the religiosity and going in a more scientific sort of direction, which was kind of weird because at the same time as folks in America were leaving behind the idea of old world faiths, if you will, they started getting very heavily into all this new age stuff, which, whether they knew it or not, is still like old world religions. It's a hodgepodge of things. So again, like kind of that nod to Shirley MacLaine, people who are being spiritual without being religious, which we have the mother, flat out state that she's not religious, but she's got ideas about things and she sees enough to make her to believe. And that's one of the fun things about Father Karras is you watch him have to deal with this, and he's dealing with his own guilt, and he's struggling with his own faith, telling his fellow priest that he feels like a pretender, false prophet, if you will. It's not enough to be a psychologist. And he seemed to have gone into the priesthood. He says he feels like he lost his faith. You don't feel like he had faith by the time you see him in this film. He seems to be very involved in the sciencey end of things, and he had tried to approach everything as a psychological therapist, but that's not enough because people have spiritual needs, and it's one thing to treat somebody for mental and emotional needs. That is the job of a good therapist. But if you have a congregation, you're going to have to deal with something more. You're going to have to deal with something esoteric and metaphysical. And he's lost touch with that. And you really see that struggle. And at the same time, you can see he's been raised with like those good old fashioned values. He's devoted to his mother, and he flies across the country to check up on his mother. Like how many people, like you struggle to get a phone call. Your parents struggle to get a phone call once a week, right? When you move out. But here's this guy who makes time to fly all the way across the country to see his mom, make sure she's okay, call uncle, make sure he's checking in, things like that. So he's a good boy. He's what they call him back in the neighborhood. He's a good boy. He's a good boy. But he's going through a crisis, and you see it and you feel it. And I love these little nods. Again, it's a building up of the character. When he walks into her apartment, his mom's apartment for the first time, you see pictures of young mom, but you see pictures of young dad. Young dad used to be a prize fighter. So later on, when you see him running and boxing for recreation, you get it. Like, oh, okay, there's this foundation. Like, this guy is very physical. He's not just a good boy. He's probably really tough, which he's going to need to be later on. And all of this groundwork is laid in. And Miller plays it to a T. I love right up into the point when Father Marin gets there and the two of them together confront the demon, and he sees things that are just finally completely 100% unexplainable. Levitation is not explainable, and he just kind of shuts down. He goes into abject shock. But then that fighter in him rises up. He feeds on the strength of Father Marin, and when he starts throwing out the holy water, and you can see his shock and his weakness and his guilt goes away as he starts screaming with Father Marion, "The power of Christ compels you." He's there. He's in the moment. He is in the fight. He is in the war. And once he believes, he is all in until finally the demon finds the chink in his armor and gets at him like that. And that moment of weakness, again, is wonderfully played. And it's his guilt that does save the day, because two valuable elderly people have died because he wasn't there now. And now a child is at risk. And so he mans up and he does the unthinkable. And it's such a tragically heroic moment. It's Shakespearean in scope, and Miller just plays it to the hilt. It's so impactful. And I love the staging of the last shot. Actors love to do death scenes. They like the drama and the pathos and getting to emote and do all that stuff with the death scene. What does he get? He's face down in the concrete, and his friend Father Dwyer is trying to give him his last rites, his confession, and all you get out of that is him squeezing his hand in like saying an affirmative, and just the way he does it. It's such a simple thing, but I felt so much impact in that, like just absolutely brilliant. And maybe I'm reading too much into it, but like it touched me, like the way that scene was handled, and his response just with his last gasp, just trying to hold on long enough to get that last absolution. Wonderful.
The emotion from the actor who played, or the priest who played Father Dyer, is amazing as well.
I'll tell you, the priests who were in this film, they felt legit. I mean, they felt like they were real actors. I didn't know they weren't actors until just today, and I'm so impressed by Father Dwyer.
Now, I will say, before we get to production, because we do need to talk about the production value of this movie, because especially the expanded cut, a lot of the stuff they added in was really good. But I want to talk about Jason Miller as well, but I'm going to go back earlier in the film. I've read the book as well, and like I said, I've mentioned before, I'm Catholic, but I've also had the good fortune to be around a number of different aspects of Catholicism and the back room of Catholic Church. In the book, Father Karras's job, yes, he's a psychiatrist, but it's even bigger than that. He's a psychiatrist for priests. And that's why he mentions that.
Okay, that's why the cop approaches him like that.
Yeah, and he's a kind of psychiatrist for priests. And this is one of the little known things, is that, priests go to confession themselves and go to psychiatrists to help deal with all the things that they hear. And the only way they could talk about that stuff is under the seal of the confessional, which is why he mentions at one point to Father Kinnaman, it's like, because he goes, not Father Kinnaman, Detective Kinnaman says that I could arrest you because there was a case where psychiatrists, didn't talk about something. And he said, well, I could say that it was under the seal of the confessional. That's because it is. Those psychiatric sessions are also under the seal, under the confessional. So
that was clever.
Yeah. So, but, in that position, and I have been fortunate enough to meet some of the people that are in those positions, it is very difficult for them because these priests are dealing with crises of faith themselves and different things. And so it really wears on these people. And that's what is, Father Karras is being under all of this weight of all this other guilt from other priests who are losing faith or may have done things that are bad or just any number of things. And that is all stuff that Jason Miller talked about, preparing for this character, is that he is wearing the guilt and burdens of hundreds of priests on his shoulders.
Yeah, that's interesting, because that, in a way, that makes him a Christ-like figure, because now he is wearing the sins of the world, if you will. He's carrying that burden. So that's a very Christ-like thing I never thought of before. But from a psychological standpoint, I'll say this. When my mom was going through her mental health training as a nurse, she made a comment that sticks with me to this day. She said, never go into psychology. And I was like, well, why not? It's like, which is ironic because that's what I ended up doing in the military. She said, because if you listen to people's problems all day, it just makes you crazy too. So some of her interactions with some of the people teaching her made her feel like maybe they were having a few issues dealing with everybody else's issues. And like the priest, a lot of psychologists are also in therapy because they need it for the same reason.
Yeah. And I will say that, there was really no time in this movie to explore it further. We've already talked about some of the pacing problems with this movie, but at one point when he says that he needs to get out of this job and transfer, it's because of that. He's lost his faith because all he's hearing about is other priests talking about not having faith anymore, and all of their issues and everything else, and it is.
Yeah, I can imagine. He's like, well, why do I believe if they don't believe?
Yeah, it's kind of like really taking a toll on him, and so it's pretty fascinating to watch him do this. Even though it's not in the movie, you could see it in his performance, and I think that he was really very, very, very good in this movie. I don't think this movie, the cast, gets enough credit. I think people talk about the couple scenes with Max von Sydow and the exorcism and everything, but he's incredible in the movie. So is Linda Blair. So is Jason Miller, and then the supporting cast is very, very good as well. So
I will point out one thing, and that is that a lot of it is the relationship between Damien and Father Marin, because you have Damien, who is the modern representative of what the church has become, and you have Marin, who is very much the old style priest. What do you expect a priest to be? Yeah. This is a guy who shows absolute total faith. He dies for his faith, in fact. And so a lot of it that you see is the brief interactions between these two views of the church coming together to save this child, because the child is more important than they are to themselves. And I think that's a really great lesson.
Go ahead, Jeff.
Just to follow up on your point for a moment, just a very brief aside here. The background characters are also quite stellar. All of the actresses, house servants, her maid, her secretary, her butler. These are all strong performances, and her Hollywood friends. And there's so much wonderful character interaction. Like the one guy being a complete total jerk, probably because he's Jewish, and he's messing with her German butler, calling him a Nazi, until the guy just loses it and goes to thrash him. And there's lots of really wonderful character moments like that, where you see, like, okay, there's some snobbery, there's some racism kind of going on here. You've got that sort of thing happening. And like at the end, her secretary, she stayed with her throughout this entire trauma, but by the end, she's decided not to keep working for this woman because it's just too much. Yeah. And they have this moment where they hug each other fiercely. And so there's just a lot of, like you said, there's a lot of really understated but very important acting jobs throughout this film. Like, nobody's wasted in this film.
I will say, I got the impression with the priest, this kitten is all over the place. With
He's a Halloween kitten.
Yeah, with Burke, goading the servant, that I also felt that it was part of the oppression of the house. That Pazuzu was already inspiring hatred and division and everything in the household. The other thing I will say, as far as I think I lost you had mentioned something else that I was one of the things I also found interesting about Damien's character is that I also have the good fortune, I know, and this is all I'll say about it because he doesn't like to talk about it. I know an actual Catholic exorcist, a priest. Pretty much everything Damien does before Father Marin gets there is wrong. So, and it empowers the demon.
It's kind of funny because, like, I know a little something from my psychology background, and I've studied up on this subject a little bit. And one of the things the medical doctors say that is correct is, before you send somebody to the psychologist, and even in my role as a behavioral science specialist, before I would send them up onto the psychotherapist or what have you, you try and determine if there is any somatic component to the issue. Are they getting too much EMF radiation? Has there been a change in their diet that's altered their brain chemistry? You've got to look for that, for some sort of tangible reason, before you start going like, okay, we need to send somebody to the shrink, or even beyond, we need to send somebody to the exorcist. So I will say, on that part, the film was very spot on in the way that was addressed.
Yeah, like
I will also point out that Damien, it definitely does not know anything about exorcisms up to that point. And you can definitely, and in fact, he goes on to having conversations with the demon, something that Marin comes in and says, do not talk to this creature. He's going to try to use that as a weapon. And it's like, it's already too late. He's been having conversations with the demon.
And Damien, I think, does it out of his training. He does it out of a psychological training. He is scientifically curious, which is probably the worst thing you could do when it comes to this particular problem if you believe it's real. You know,
I mean,
and
like watching his scenes with Reagan, and even watching the scenes with the psychotherapist who's a hypnotist, that all plays out pretty much exactly as you would expect. They're going through the procedures they've been trained to follow, and unfortunately, this isn't the right circumstance for that.
yeah. Oh, I forgot about that moment where I wonder if they actually had Linda
crushed
Blair
his
grab
nuts.
that guy by the nuts. Oh my God.
Mhm.
I mean, but that was so horrific, and that brings us. So let's go right
You
into.
talk about Linda Blair's stare, boy, the stare she gives him before she goes
Yeah.
for them nuts.
And let's talk now about the production of this film, the cinematography of this film, and that scene in particular, but other scenes. But I'm going to mention that scene, and then we'll go around the horn. I'm going to go to Steve first, then come to Jeff. They did such a great thing with that scene, and it's nothing groundbreaking or new, but it was very effective. Where they show her change, and this goes to Linda Blair's performance. That little girl's ability to go from innocent child to malevolent entity makes you believe there are two separate people in her. And that is incredible. And she does it just through facial expression, you know, which is amazing. But then she grabs the guy's nuts and crushes them, you know. So this little 12-year-old girl just goes for the gonads and just vicious. And then they cut to a shot where it shows the guy. It's very Hitchcockian almost, you know, since we're going to go to Psycho, where he's going to the ground.
He falls and the camera follows him as he falls.
Yeah.
I love that shot.
Yeah. And it gives you that suspense, that horror, that terror. It's very much out of that old Hitchcock tradition. You know, I was thinking I was watching Vertigo.
Right out of Psycho, like man. Like the tumble down the stairs. Psycho used the same camera move.
But it's very effective in that sense of showing of you are now in the place of Linda Blair's character and looming over him, and the horror in his face as he's going to the ground, being taken down by the demon. So that's just one aspect that I thought was really well done in the movie. Going to Steve, what did you think of the production value, the cinematography, the sound? I think Jeff's comment before on the sound was absolutely spot on, and I want to hear more about that as well. What did you think about that in the movie, Steve?
I thought that the cinematography was excellent. I mean, there are a number of iconic shots in this movie. And I will say, like that scene at night that you see, like a lot of the box art, you know, where you have the lamps, the street lamps on, and you have you know, that one character walking in the dark. That's just really beautiful. A lot of the shots where they show you the stairway, excellent. It actually reminded me a little bit of Joker, like the movie Joker. I suspect that Todd Phillips may have taken some inspiration from that with the whole the Joker tap dancing on the stairs. It has that kind of shot. And I will say, it just looks, there's just something that is really kind of artistic about it that I think really, really works. A lot of the use of lighting, I think, is very good, especially when you start seeing scenes like Ellen Burstyn going through.
Look at that.
Yeah, that's another really good one.
I mean,
yeah, that shows you the lighting very well. That it's just the lighting is nowhere near her face, but you see just enough to show how scary it is, and I think that really works. But I was thinking,
this is 1973, before CGI or anything else. That's all practical and real lighting. It's amazing.
Yeah. I mean, you know, you don't really need CGI.
Watch the behind the scenes of Poltergeist and look at the scenes showing how Toby Hooper lit some of the scenes in that, and it's amazing, like with the smoke and shooting beams of light through tanks of milky water to get a particular softness. Just incredibly creative stuff they were doing back then.
And then there are times like towards the end where you see blue light coming out of Regan's room. You know, it's really creepy and otherworldly, and I mean those kinds of lighting decisions, I think, really enhance the movie. The sets are all believable; they're all practical as well. I mean, it looks like they used a real house for this. You know, all these buildings that have this very old world kind of flavor, like almost like it's Lovecraftian. It just really, really works for this kind of film. You know, to kind of ground it in that kind of realism. And, you know, even the scenes in Iraq, it looks like they actually filmed there from what I understand. and that really kind of gives you a lot of the atmosphere of the movie as well. Even though it's total daylight, there is a sense of the sinister under the surface, and it's all just the way it's shot, the use of shadows and the light, all those types of things. And yeah, and that's another reason, honestly, that I want to see a young Father Merrin movie because I just want to see a movie that is made like that. I don't have a problem with like anything that they did. And as far as the sound, I have to say that the music is all very, very good. It hits the tone and the mood perfectly. And in fact, I thought it was interesting. Yeah, yeah. And I will say that there was one point where there were scenes that were not used in the movie because they didn't have good enough sound for it, and they didn't want to bring down the movie by not having the wrong music or the wrong sound in the movie. And I'm like, okay, I could totally dig that.
I applaud that decision.
I will say that also one of the things they did, which is they wouldn't do this now, they just added in post in CGI, is the scenes where it becomes cold in the room because the demonic presence. Yeah. They actually filmed that in a meat locker.
In a freezer, yeah.
In a freezer, yeah. So everybody there is freezing for real, and I think it helped the performance as well. So
it did. I mean, John Carpenter would use this exact same method when he would do The Thing. Several years later, because like you said, you can do it in post, but it never reads as real. It doesn't look real at all. When you can tell when somebody's breathing out. They never seem to get the right density or volume of the hot breath coming out. As Lance would say, it's just better to do as much practically as you can. And I have to agree with that. CGI has its place. It's a tool. But when you don't have access to that, you've got to get creative. And that adds to so much more. CGI isn't a means of being creative. It's a means of kind of solving a problem. But it lacks the creativity. I mean, it doesn't lack artistry. Don't get me wrong. I'm an artist myself. It doesn't lack artistry, but it can lack creativity.
I mean, I think there are elements here, and I want to go to you to answer all the other stuff in just a second. I mean, I think there are things here that could have used some CGI. For example, when her head turns around backwards, that is very obviously a doll. I think you might have been able to do something CGI wise.
Yeah, you know what? You would have to spend like Jurassic Park levels of money to make that look realistic, if you ask me. I actually prefer the fact that that was a physical thing I could see there. Okay. Even though they didn't animate the face, it's like I wouldn't change a bit of, like, say, the transformation from American Werewolf in London with any CGI.
No, that's a classic. I agree.
I'll say, like, for instance, one of the best things I saw with it where CGI enhanced a movie, and it's doing very little things. When George Lucas came out with his specialized editions, as the X-wings are flying in to engage the Death Star, one of the things he did is the figures inside the cockpits. Now you can like actually see them moving and like touching their controls and things. Whereas before, of course, they were just like little models inside of little models. And so they brought it to life. And I was like, now that is a great use for CGI. And don't get me wrong, CGI certainly has its place. We wouldn't have fun movies like Godzilla versus King Kong without CGI. You're just not doing that to that sort of scale. So it's a tool. It's just knowing when to use it and, honestly, when not to rely on it. But as for production, if you don't have anything more.
Nope. What'd you think of the production?
Now, here's something very interesting. I don't know for sure. I agree with Steve. It looks very much like everything was shot in actual locations. That looks like a real house. I don't think it was a set. They're clearly outside of brownstones. I believe they did go to Iraq or Palestine to shoot the Father Merrin sequences. And that it all adds like just it really grounds it in this reality. You feel the realness of everything, which is fantastic. Now, other than like certain effects like, walls, floor, doors and stuff cracking, that was done outside of the location, I'm pretty sure. And another thing that I found very interesting is, again, I can't confirm this, but to my eye.
Real quick, I'll give you an update. Most of this film, there was B-roll shot in DC, and the rest of the film was shot on a soundstage, except for, and you're going to know this name, the Iraq scenes were all shot on location in Mosul.
Okay.
Which is famous now
that's,
because we fought a number of battles in Mosul recently.
well, that is really impressive because that house looks like a house. It does not look like a set. It doesn't look like a stage. No, you see the camera go around every possible angle. And wow, that I'm floored by how well done that was. So hats off to that. But another thing that strikes me, and again, if you can fool my eye, that's what I'm looking for. If you can fool me into thinking that you are actually filming in somebody's house or apartment or mansion or what have you, I love it all the more. Like, you have done your job as a set designer, as a art director, or, whatever the position is in the film at the time. That's just hats off. And another thing I've got to give it to is the lighting. Now, I'm not talking about just the spooky lighting. I think this is purposeful, and I don't know for sure, but all of the light you see in the movie, for all the mundane scenes, all feels like natural light. That they're just using. I got a lamp here, and I've got a light up here, and this light's going on over here. It all feels 100% like natural lighting, so that when we do get to the supernatural stuff, and it all gets amped up with all the fun, creepy, and creative lighting, it takes us from this very real place. And again, they might have had, some lights, some reflectors, some things like that. I don't know. But it all looks real. It all looks visually real. It grounds everything. And again, that's one of the things that adds this believability to the film. So that when we get to the supernatural stuff, it looks otherworldly because everything else looks so doggone real. So when we get to that stuff, and you're just kind of freaking out because the angles and the lighting and the shadows they use and the way they would frame people in the shots, it all just builds to this point. It's kind of like Spielberg with Jaws. You see the shark doing things you can believe that a shark will do until you get to the climax, and the shark does things a shark could not do, like pull this great big boat behind it or sink it by jumping up on it, going down with all three of these barrels, keeping a tank in its mouth and getting blown up. None of that stuff would happen, but you're along for the ride because Spielberg has built you to that point. He is taking you slowly and precisely on that ride. And that's how I feel this movie is. By the time you get to this climax, when things look even bizarre, like the vomit and the head spinning stuff, and you're like, okay, I can tell that's a dummy. I know the bed's raising up because there's a forklift on the other side of this wall here. But still, you just buy it because that's how good the production is. You've been sold on this by how mundane and everyday everything looks until you get to the extreme. Absolutely brilliant. You're muted, man.
Muted because the cat keeps running around. Couple other things I'm going to add on production before we wrap up. On sound, I think that one of the things they did so effective here was giving you little auditory clues at moments where Pazuzu's influence is being felt. Mm-hmm. So whether or not it came across in the performance, which it did, they also gave you that auditory clue with that little growl that was underneath the scene. I think that was so effective. I love that touch.
And hats off to the lady who does the voice for Pazuzu. Let's see, what's her name?
Yeah, Mercedes. I can't remember her last name.
Let's see. McCambridge. Wow.
McCambridge.
What a performance she gives as the voice of Pazuzu. And she just adds this whole extra layer of sound to everything. When you think about like all the little cricks and twists and these wet noises as things happen to poor Regan, the auditory cues, like you talk about, these sort of sibilant growls, the mixing of this cacophony of voices played backwards with growls and grunts and snarls to, give you the vocalization of the demon. But you just, all of that would have fallen apart without her adding her voice as another sound effect into everything. What a tremendous performance.
Absolutely. The last thing I'm going to say, I'm going to talk about the, practical effects. So Once again, I'm going to hit on the practical effects and how wonderful they are um, in film in general and in this film in particular. One of the things you got out of this performance, it's an iconic scene you would never have gotten if it wasn't for practical effects. And I'm talking about the scene with the pea soup. Now, that pea soup, this is one of those little things you catch up on in the extras. Jeff loves to watch extras. I watch them sometimes on movies that I'm really, into, because I'm kind of that guy as well. And I watched it, and Jason Miller talked about the fact that the pea soup was originally was set up with tubing. It was originally supposed to hit him in the chest, and it misfired, and it hit him in the face.
Perfect.
And his look of shock and disgust at that was so good that they didn't do another take. That's one take. That's all they did for the whole film, because he was so disgusted by getting hit in the face by this hot pea soup that came out, or this warm pea soup that came out, that it perfectly, and then he wipes it off his face, and it perfectly captured the moment. Cut, print, that was it. It was done.
Happy accident.
Yeah, it's one of those things that if it wasn't practical effects, it would have been perfect in CGI. It would have hit him in the chest, and it would have lost, a lot of the punch of that scene. Because when we see that look on Jason Miller's face as Damian Karras, all of us are disgusted for him. We're like, oh my God, this bile, And so instead of looking like, once they tell you it's pea soup, you can see it's pea soup. But when you first see it, you're like, oh God, what disgusting garbage was this that she just hawked up?
It's funny, like when I was making my own short horror films, we used to use things like cans of cream corn and a lot of food coloring to make really disgusting vomit.
Yeah.
And when you discolor that stuff, it looks really gross.
Exactly. So, but I think that's interesting, because it's another one of those things. It's like Lance would say, it's like practical is better if you could do it. And I think this is another case where that's a great example, and you just get that visceral reaction, and the actual seeing him having to wipe it off his face just tells a story in and of itself. It's really disgusting. So we've gone a little long, and I think we could go even longer, but I'm afraid we're going to have to wrap it up here. Real quick though, final thoughts on this film before we go out. So I'm going to go to Jeff and then Steve, and I'll give mine, and then we'll get out of here. So Jeff, what are your final thoughts on this movie?
For me, movie still holds up. It's not going to be to everybody's taste, and it's not just the subject matter. Of course, it's going to be that this movie is a slow burn. So it's going to take a dedicated cinemaphile, if you will, somebody who's willing to take their time with the story. So if you like films that if you like the films of, say, somebody like T. West, who is the king of the slow burn in the modern era, or films like The Others with Nicole Kidman.
I like that movie a lot.
Oh yeah, that's a great one. Like The Innocents. This is in the genre of a classic horror film. Some of those classic ghost stories that I really enjoyed growing up with and seeing when people revive it. But it goes in a completely different direction, because normally I am not enthralled with films that deal with demon possession. It's a little too gnarly for me on average, but I can still watch this one just because it's just so doggone masterfully done. There's a lot to dig into every time you watch it, and even though the subject matter is can be grotesque, it's still got a lot of evocative power in it, even with our jaded sensibilities of today.
Absolutely. Steve, what'd you think?
Yeah, I would agree with all that. Yeah, I think that this movie still holds up, and it is a classic and an influential classic. And really thinking about it, I kind of realized like it was even an influence on movies like Ghostbusters, with the way Dana Barrett is levitating 4 feet above her covers. There is no Dana, only Zool, with that growly voice. All that is from The Exorcist. So it's like I can kind of appreciate now other films, because you see what they took from The Exorcist and then added to it. So there's a little bit of that, but even as its own movie, I think it's still extremely creepy. I think the performances are still extremely powerful, and from a lot of actors that really are not that well known. In most cases, I mean, yeah, you have your Max von Sydow, you have your Ellen Burstyn. Everybody remembers Linda from this movie, but not a whole lot of people remember Jason Miller, and Miller is still very, very good at this movie. And he got it over like people like Alan Alda, who was being considered at one point. So, I mean, the fact that so, you got some really great performances out of it. Everything visually just really works. The sound really works. I would say this is like one of the textbook horror movies. It's a bit of a slow burn, but it is worth getting through the slow burn, because where it ultimately ends up is really, really epic. And because of that, I would say, definitely see it if you haven't and you have any interest at all in horror.
Absolutely. I will say that I think that this movie also still holds up. It's almost 50 years old. I don't think it looks it. A lot of the time, I think it's still a wonderfully crafted movie. It is a bit of a slow burn. I also think it's an incredibly important and influential movie. I know it influenced at least one writer, the one sitting in this chair right here. I can write about almost anything, but I like to write about stuff that scares me, and demonic possession scares the hell out of me. I like to write about stuff that starts small, evil that starts small and grows in its power. It's one of the things I like to touch on a lot. And I think a lot of those roots go back to this movie. And so, between this movie, Amityville Horror, and Omen, really those are the three movies that I watched fairly young that probably had the most influence on me. And this one being probably the biggest of those, except for maybe Omen. I have to say that scene at the end of the Omen where Damien turns around with those blue eyes and he has that little smile is still one of the creepiest damn things ever.
Yeah, you probably got that smile, but tell like, all right, turn around, smile, you get some ice cream.
Yeah. I will also say real quick before we go, this movie was incredibly successful. I mean, cannot be understated what a phenomenon this movie and how much it scared the hell this movie was, and how much it scared the hell out of America. But this movie was made for $11 million back in 1972. It opened in 1973. In 1973, this movie grossed worldwide $440 million.
Mm-hmm.
Huge.
Yeah, I heard it was like the highest grossing record for like most horror movies.
Yeah,
at the time.
If you put that in real dollars, that is probably pushing almost $2 billion, in today's dollars.
So even by today's standards, it's a mega hit.
Yeah. So, I mean, it just can't be understated how much of a hit this movie was. And it goes back to what I was saying. It's like not all successful movies are good movies, but when you get a successful movie that also is a very good movie, wow, just wow. And I think that if you are a horror fan or a writer or anything like that, I think you owe it to yourself to see this movie, just to see a lot of it. And then, if you're so inclined, pick up the book because it's interesting. And I think Steve's point is right on point, which is William Peter Blatty wrote the screenplay from his own book, which probably wasn't the best decision because he loves his book, obviously. And so he took most of the book and put it in the screenplay. So, so that's probably not, it doesn't always work out that way. And I think we were blessed that it was good enough in this movie, but I do think there are some pacing problems with the movie because obviously the man loves what he wrote in his novel, so he went from there. So with that said, I want to thank all of you for watching this episode of Cinema Crusaders. This is just the beginning of Halloween movie madness. Like I said, next week we're going to be joined by a special guest from Omen Comics, Michael Nunley, and we are going to be reviewing Psycho, the movie that is credited with starting the slasher craze all the way back in the 1950s. So we're going to be watching that movie, and then we'll be going from there to the other end of the slasher craze, which is Seven. Wow, that movie creeps me out so much that I can only watch that movie every couple of years because I need to forget about what happened in the movie for a while. And then we'll be doing In the Mouth of Madness, and then finishing up with Exorcist 3, which continues the story of Father Dyer, Detective Kinnaman, and Father Damien Karras as well, how he comes into it. So with that said, I want to thank my host. Thank you so much, our co-host. Thank you so much, Steve.
Yeah, this was good. A good movie to go through, and I'm kind of glad I finally watched this, and it was fun talking about it. And I look forward to getting to the next movie next week, because I don't think we've talked about Alfred Hitchcock nearly enough, and I look forward to that.
Absolutely. Alfred Hitchcock is a master. And honestly, I can't wait till you see Exorcist 3, because I'm kind of curious to see what you think of that movie after you've seen this movie. So, but that's going to be in several weeks from now. Thank you so much, Jeff.
Always a pleasure to be here. And like you, I'm looking forward to getting Steve's reaction, because so many of these films we do on cinema, Steve is experiencing for the first time. And that's kind of a special joy, seeing somebody's reaction after they've been introduced to something, you've grown up loving, and getting their take on things.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Especially Exorcist. Exorcist is kind of a staple in my family, except that my wife won't watch it with me because she's like, that's just too disturbing. And I get it, so, but she still loves me. So I'm happy. So with that said, I want to thank you, everybody. Watch cinema, go check out Exorcist. Hit us up with any questions that you have. We love talking about these films, and this is a film that we love to talk about. Really great movie. But ask us anything about these movies, and I'm sure we'd be more than happy to engage with you. And until next time, keep eating that popcorn, keep watching movies, and we'll see you next time on Cinema Crusaders. Bye, everybody.
So long.